I'm a firm believer that every single person on this planet has a talent, has something they're fantastic at. And I think it's criminal that most people live their lives so enclosed in their own comfort zones that they never find what it is.
Hello everyone and welcome to Diversifying Data. I'm Rakhi Sharma and I would really love to welcome my two guests today. Caroline Carruthers is the co-founder and CEO of Carruthers & Jackson and co-author of the industry-renowned books, The Chief Data Officer's Playbook and Data-Driven Business Transformation, How to Disrupt, Innovate and Stay Ahead of the Competition. So really just an underachiever by all accounts. You need to work harder.
I really do.
You do.
Yeah.
I think we'll reassess how lacking your work career trajectory has been in
That'll
this
be
podcast.
the next hour.
It will. I'd also love to welcome Isabel Becker to the podcast. She is a data management consultant with Kubrick and actually a podcast host expert herself with her own podcast I'm a huge fan of. It's Data Stories, which is a podcast which examines the connectivity between literary analysis and data analysis. So starting with you, Caroline, would you mind telling us and the listeners a little bit about yourself and your journey into data?
Ooh, it's like, how far back do you want to go? The dinosaurs roamed the earth and all those kind of things. So I guess for me, I've always been interested in technology. I've always been a self-certified geek, loved that kind of thing. For any of your listeners who are past 50, they recognise that I got a Commodore 64, because I think that's how we all date ourselves from that era, is which machine that you ended up learning to program on.
Yeah.
And as soon as I got that, I was completely hooked, and I was never going to go back from that point onwards. Started out in computing because that was pretty much all there was around for me at the time as a complete nerd, and just loved it. Ended up TSB as a graduate scheme, then swiftly moved on to IBM as one of their consultants and got involved with what was really, really trendy at the time, and it actually grew into Agile.
Yeah.
So at the time it was rapid application development is what we called it.
Okay.
So I was one of the people that actually helped create the Agile methods
Wow.
for my sins. I know.
Wow. So again, it's slacking
Like
on
how-
all fronts. Absolutely horrific.
Sorry, people, that was partly my fault. I do apologise
I hear
profusely.
so the word we hear agile banded about pretty much in every organization, every client that I work with, agile methodology, ways of working. That all sort of stems from stuff that you were part
Well,
of.
it's a very small part of it, I'm
But
absolutely
still.
sure. But IBM was one of the founding members of this thing called rapid application development and a method called DSDM, Dynamic Systems Development Method. And I was one of the people at IBM who were involved in helping create that.
Wow, it's phenomenal.
So that was a long time ago, by the way, just letting everybody know. Then I worked in consulting for a bit before I decided that I had to really go and join the light side and do something useful with my time.
Yeah.
Apologies to all fellow consultants out there. And then went to work for local government. I've worked for financial institutions, and then literally decided I had better put my money where my mouth is and created Carruthers & Jackson, so we could help more people with data.
It's amazing. That is quite, I'd love to unpack that more, which we will get into, but that is quite a, not a really linear trajectory. It's gone in all sorts of tangents, which I think is brilliant.
I think it probably stems from the fact that I've got the attention span of a gnat. And I'm a little bit like that person that goes, oh, squirrel. So if I see something that's interesting, then that's what I have to go and do.
Yeah.
And so to me, and it's probably says a lot about my personality, the stickier, the more complicated the problem, the more I feel like I want to get involved with it.
Ah, that's great.
So that's just been my career, from the more, ooh, that looks interesting and
Yeah.
difficult. Let's go and do that.
Yeah, there's a lot of bravery in that, to be honest, because sometimes I think my personality is to not run away from the challenge at all, but it's not to leap headfirst into it, which is what you seem to sort of thrive on, which is inspirational because I'm not that person at all.
You say brave, I say stupid. It depends on which way you want to
It's
do
all your
it.
perspective on it. Yeah, no, definitely brave from my perspective. I guess very much same question. I know you're at a different point.
I haven't created Agile.
Maybe you're in the process of creating something that in 10 years' time
Exactly.
is going to be the new thing. So,
Yeah.
but yes, please tell us your journey.
So it's been a bit more brief to Caroline, but I studied English literature at university and kind of dabbled in kind of film and TV after uni, and then I came across this book called The Attention Merchants
Mm-hmm.
by Tim Wu, and it's a history of what's called like the attention economy, and so it kind of goes through how like the newspaper was created and how that was trying to like grab people's attention, and then like radio, TV, film, social media, and the kind of last part of the book was about first of all, they talked about advertising and how I think in the 60s in New York in advertising, they started using data to do like audience segmentation and target some of their advertising, which was interesting. And then it kind of went to talking about Google and Facebook and how their power was having so much data and using those to create those algorithms, the recommendation engines and things like that. And I've always been really interested in storytelling and narrative and communications, and it seemed to me really interesting how data was kind of like this latest iteration of storytelling, where it was kind of being used to influence both the stories that were being told to people and also the kind of industries within which those stories are coming out. And I just found that really interesting, and it was really that book that introduced that kind of relationship between things like newspaper, TV, film, radio, right through to data. And I just saw this really interesting connection between what I've always been interested in. I've never been quite gifted in creative writing and like actually writing myself, but I've always been fascinated with the art of storytelling itself and like thinking about it critically and why it's so important and interesting. And I just saw this really interesting opportunity where data was kind of sitting at the end of that history. And to me, I really see data all about communication, and data is kind of a tool for communicating a message. And I just thought that was really niche. And then I found Kubrick.
And that, I mean, that's again, I think the way that you've explained that and the links between, but I don't think I've never heard data being described in that way in terms of communication and telling us. I mean, everyone talks about data as telling a story, but really dating it all the way back, it's kind of always been there. It's always been there. It's never been as, an industry of its own right, but it's always, the facts, the data, looking at actual information and tying it to a narrative or a story for your business or for anything has always technically been there in some capacity. I guess within that, have you experienced, because you've very much experienced data going through all those different stages, and now to be able to link it to a generation that can perceive it in that way of like storytelling and narrative and connecting the dots, have you seen a change in how data is perceived?
Oh, completely and totally. And actually, it's fascinating listening to you talk about it in that kind of way. I literally, in some ways, I feel a bit like all I've done is clear the field a little bit for much smarter people to follow. And when you hear things like that, that's the kind of stuff that is like, honestly, that's awe-inspiring. It's amazing, because I have to say I share the love of literature that you have. So I'm an avid reader and can be found happiest in my library at home. Just
you have an in-home library?
I do have an in-home library.
God, I just think my Beauty and the Beast days where you just have a beautiful library with just books everywhere.
That, honestly, that would be my goal in life. One of those massive big ones. But,
amazing.
So I do, and that's my happiest place to go to. So listening to you do it, and listening to you talk about something that I'm also passionate about, which is the side of data and us actually expanding human knowledge by building on it. You put it so eloquently. It was lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Well, this is a lot of love that we're sharing here today. I think it's all really important to support each other, and really we learn from each other so much just by having these conversations. So this is off to a very good start, I must say. So I think, coming from yourself from a non-STEM background, what sort of advantages and disadvantages do you think that coming from a STEM background versus a non-STEM background, have you found that there are any advantages and disadvantages for both of you?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I found, I'll start with the advantages.
Yes, let's always start on a positive.
Which is, I found that from my education, from my degree, I always look at things in context. The kind of skill that you're taught to sharpen in a literature degree is if you take a piece of text and you need to make a persuasive argument to show how it links, how it illuminates a certain social context. So you might take a line of a poem or something and argue, oh, this is showing that in this time period, kind of social norms were this way, and actually it was this way. And it's kind of like, it's kind of taking just a little nugget of something and having the skill to be able to put it against a backdrop of context and situate it in that way. And I think that in my role now, so I did the data management course, but I'm actually a data product owner at the John Lewis Partnership, which had lots of transferable skills in the training. And the purpose of my role is to create data products that enable like the data strategy and the business strategy, and being able to see data in context of like the business setting, and not seeing it kind of neutral and just in isolation and in and of itself, which I think, coming from a technical background, even though you might, don't want to make anyone upset.
Oh, yeah. dig a hole for yourself. Go for it.
No, but I think you might be like become an expert in, let's say, chemistry or something. But I think the way that you're taught, because you're becoming an expert in that field, there isn't necessarily like a social context lesson about what does this mean in society,
in the wider context,
and why does this matter. You're not really asking those questions when you're doing that type of subject. Not to say that those people can't, think like that. Of course, it's just, we're talking about the academic background that you come from. And I think I have that ability to make those interesting connections between the data and the context. And that's actually really important in industry, because we're not just making data products for the hell of it. It's because it needs to be tied to the data strategy and the business strategy, because it needs to make the business money or save the business money and get customers. And so it has to have that connection. And so that's why I think that there's an advantage from my background.
Yeah, that's really, I just think also you've got, when you come from a literature background, you can, it's very much around spinning the narrative into whatever you want to create it. It's not black and white. It's not right and wrong. And that's what data is as well. There's so many ways of it being interpreted. And when you're taught in a particular subject that this is right and this is wrong, and this is, where you get a plus mark and this is where you get a minus mark, sometimes that focus of thinking, sometimes not for everyone, like you said, but I do find that sometimes it hinders that ability to perceive things in lots of different ways. So that was really interesting, and I'd love to hear your take on it as well, in terms of STEM background, advantages, disadvantages.
So I think I probably came from a more traditional STEM background. So I did maths and computer science at university, but I did couple it with a master's in management practice, because I think I needed the balance. And I think a lot of technical people and data people as well need to understand the balance. And I have to say, I think the most important skill or aspect that anybody coming into data could have is a high degree of curiosity. Because I think that's the most important thing in everything that we do. It's how we use data to solve problems, answer questions, that we can dig through it. I find this, fascinating images in my head of what we can use it to do. So that sense of curiosity, and actually, I don't think it matters that you've got a STEM background or not a STEM background if that's one of your core fundamental beliefs and how you do it. But I think coming from a technical background into data, I think data's perceived as a little bit of a nerdy subject from the outside in. I think from anybody working in data, I'll tell you an example, exactly from the example you just gave of the role that you do at John Lewis. There are so many different types of roles in data that pull in all aspects of skills. So it's almost, I think that, there's a whole wide ocean of data roles out there that should appeal to anybody. And I'm really keen that we kind of open it and make it as accessible and interesting for people. And we'll only be able to do that by talking about all the interesting type of jobs there is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that leads nicely onto a couple of questions from my side. So Karen, I'd say as a data leader, and Isabel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. How do you think that people will, how would you find and foster these skills in people? How would you recognize that? How could people demonstrate that they have this curiosity?
To me, I think it's something that becomes quite apparent when you start and talk to people. I think the important thing when you're building any kind of team, and something that I always look for, is the idea of diversity of thought.
Yes.
So I know that we can talk about outward diversity and things that you can see and can't see, but actually having a team of people who don't think in the same way is really critical when you're dealing with data, because you need to be able to come from lots of different perspectives. So I try very hard to put teams of people together that don't look, act and think the same kind of way. It's easier said than done, I'll be perfectly frank.
Right.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it's the kind of thing that I think you have to strive for whenever you're putting those kind of teams together.
Yeah, I really completely agree with that. And I think actually on the flip reverse side, I would like to know, as you as part of a team, do you see that level of leadership and diversity of thought being encouraged, or do you think that there could be more? Just not, you don't have to speak to your current role and where you're at, but I guess historically throughout your time, do you think that you would have preferred to have people who had difference of thought, or do you how do you perceive that?
Well, I can reflect on my current role, and it's really, really interesting being in the data product space, because that's kind of how data product works. You have like a product owner who is often not technical, and their skills are in kind of communication and advocating for the product and kind of selling it. And then you've got the developers in the team who have the technical skills, and then we've got like a scrum master who's helping with delivery. And so it's kind of absolutely essential for the delivery of a data product to actually have that diversity of thought.
I would probably also point out, sorry,
Go ahead.
just because you might outwardly be the leader of the team, there's oftentimes I'm the chief bottle washer.
Really?
So, depending on what people's skills are, roles are in the team, that you, a real leader, I think, can flex and adapt and be what the team needs them to be at the time. And sometimes that's to help create a vision and a strategy and point the direction. And at other times it's to stand back and let them do their thing and just make sure that the pizza's ordered and that they've got the kind of support they need to do it. So it's important, I think, in this kind of space to acknowledge that it shouldn't be a kind of everybody follow me type role.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that there needs to be maybe more new thought leadership training, or it's a fairly new concept in terms of actually being a way that managers think that it's thought leadership, as opposed to like mandating that things should be done a certain way and telling people this is your role, you've got to do it, you've got to deliver in this, without having any flexibility to pivot to people's own perceptions and ideologies and where they've come from. So that's amazing. I guess if we're going to start, I can't believe we've already done this for 20 minutes and we're now starting to talk about diversity and inclusion. So for both of you, what is diversity and inclusion to the both of you, and why is it important to you?
For me, whether this is the correct textbook answer or not, I have no idea. But for me, I want everybody to feel comfortable in their own skin and bring their whole self to work and feel happy doing that. And I think that to me is true diversity inclusion. When everybody feels that inside, that's when we've actually started to get it right.
Yeah, I love that, because I think diversity and inclusion sometimes is banded in, neurodiversity and gender diversity and racial diversity. It's all, and I think the umbrella thing is that everyone should feel welcome and included, whatever their background is. And this podcast, I'm really passionate about learning about people's stories and experiences, but I sometimes think that the umbrella terms of what it has to be in the textbook definition of it limits us very much to perceiving this huge topic in a very, very small way. So I appreciate that thought. And for you, Isabel, what would you say diversity and inclusion is to you?
I think it's about accessibility and thinking about it in a data context. I think diversity and inclusion for the data industry is really important, because I think, as I've seen you talk about a lot, data is used in business to kind of generate value and engage customers and things like that. But it's also political as well, because data is, can be used to influence political outcomes. And I think having an awareness of the kind of gravity of data and how people can really use it to invoke change and like influence outcomes, whether that's in a business context or in a political context. Like I'm thinking about Cambridge Analytica and what happened with the Trump campaign and things like that. Data is so kind of closely linked to power, really, and kind of control and exerting influence over other people. And I think that having an awareness of that is really important. And so that's what I'm trying to do with my podcast, is data stories with Isabel Becker.
Yeah. Don't worry, literally the next question I'm asking both of you. I want to know so much about everything individually.
Can I pick up on that? 'Cause I think that's a really important. So in the way you describe it, I would describe it slightly different, but I think the aim would be the absolute same. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about, is data literacy. So for me, data literacy is so much more than just being able to use data at work. We are accessing data all the time. If we're searching on Google, if we're using social media, you know, heck, if we're writing stuff in a spreadsheet at home, we're using data in some way, shape or form. And I think, unfortunately, a large part of the population maybe doesn't realise that's what they're doing. So I'm a massive advocate of spreading improved data literacy. And a lot of the work that we do at Carruthers Jackson about improving data literacy in organisations, to me, is only a halfway house, because I think that if we can help spread that message to organisations, they can then take it home and teach their parents, their children, other people in the household how important this kind of thing is. I genuinely think we're living in a state at the moment where Narnia is there, all the wardrobe doors are open, and half the people don't understand that. And we're trying to impose the physical limitations of our world on Narnia. And it doesn't work in the same kind of way.
Agreed.
And I think we need to get that understanding of the digital and the data world before we can truly start and use it properly and understand the risks and the downfalls of it as well.
Because it does trickle into every single thing that you do. We can't operate without it, without having access to data, without needing to in some way analyze what the data means. So I think data literacy actually is such an important aspect, because it is, you know, when we're talking diversity and inclusion, we always see data as a very, very niche industry. It's not now. It never was, but it isn't. And having that data literacy and accessibility, like you were saying, it is super important. And I don't know whether, and I'm sure people still perceive data and that this particular industry as being for nerds or people who don't. Even people I've heard actually recently say, I don't know what I want to do with my life. Might try data, which I think is, it's an amazing thought. But I think that it's because there's so little awareness about what it actually is and how it actually impacts our everyday life. And it's just this big cloud of, it's either you're really nerdy or it's this big huge thing and it's scary and it's a scary beast and I don't really want to touch it. So it's really interesting to hear you describe it like that.
I have people say, when I say I work in data, I kind of see their face go, oh.
Yeah. Oh, she's that girl.
Yeah. They're like, oh, data. Oh, you're taking my data. Oh,
yeah.
Oh.
You
But
start asking questions like, so what do you do after work?
But it's really important because, I like what you say about Narnia, because it's true. And people, as I think, not just as consumers but as citizens in like a society, need to have an awareness of how influential data is in like huge decisions in not just businesses but in like politics and in our country, and how I think the weight of it is really important. And it's kind of, I guess sidelined as like, oh, the people who do the data analysis or whatever, or like, that's how my Instagram feed works, but whatever. But it's actually really, really like huge. And I think because of the stigma or preconceptions about data, and people are like, oh, I don't want to think about that, or that's not for me, or whatever, that's kind of a barrier to knowledge and having that awareness as like, I think as a citizen is predominantly the most important, and then as a consumer as well. And so I think what's great about the podcast form is that it's so easy to access like information and ideas by just clicking on a podcast and pressing play. And you can kind of just access how I see it as like data culture. Like, this to me is a conversation. This is like, well, to me this is like a data story, but it's like within the data culture where we're talking about data product and data ethics and agile and all these things that if you're not in the culture, you won't know what those things mean. And so it's about having an ear in and being able to, I think the first step to being able to partake in the data economy is being able to pick up the language and kind of being able to listen to the culture. And that's why I think releasing podcasts about this topic is just like, it just meets
the two together. Yeah.
Conversely, don't you think there's also an obligation on us in the data space to use language that everybody else can understand as well?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the things we're talking about isn't a terribly complicated subject.
Yeah.
I mean, data itself, in essence, is like little building blocks.
Yeah.
So,
but it's you know, I was saying to you before the podcast started, I'm going to be fully candid here. I've never worked in data before. It's still terrifying for me in some capacity, because you feel that it is, you know, people are using very niche language, very technical language, but actually when you break it down to its core essence, it isn't all that complicated.
No.
And I think within diversity and inclusion within this particular industry, sometimes, and I don't want to make a blanket statement about it at all, but sometimes I feel like we don't get as much diversity of people working within this space because they don't understand it, and it seems very inaccessible, big, scary, don't want to touch it, or it's nerdy. Like the perceptions around it has led to it being perceived, the perceptions around it have been, you know, leaded to people not wanting to dive in because they don't understand. And it's important, like you said, forums like podcasts or, you know, even going to events. I learned so much just from going to networking events. And I think that actually shows the curiosity of thought piece that we were talking about. Just actually continuously, if you have that mindset where you are continuously committed to learning, I think this is such a great industry to be in.
Oh, completely.
I completely agree.
It's and it's that, I don't think that it's curious like, oh, what is this about? It's actually like, okay, what's this about? Let's do the due diligence and see what it's about, rather than saying, oh no, it's too scary.
It's shifting so fast. It's a fascinating industry because it's shifting so fast, because nobody has all the right answers. This isn't a field where 1 and 1 make 2. It's just not the same. There are so many shades of grey in everything that we do, and we're still figuring out some of the big problems when it comes to data. I mean, data ethics is something that we can wander down rabbit holes for years. I'm absolutely sure.
God, yes.
You know, so for me, the fascination is, and we talked about earlier on about how I just like bigger and bigger problems. This is the biggest problem. This is how we solve the biggest problems by actually starting to utilise this amazing resource that we have access to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I honestly, like I said, we could go down a rabbit hole. And just for full disclosure, I am going out for lunch afterwards, so we will be continuing this conversation offline. But I really want to dive into your personal journeys, because really this podcast is there to highlight individual people's stories in the hopes that creates, as I was saying before, a shared experience, which I think is the way in which we can narrow any kind of gaps in diversity and inclusion. If someone sees someone that looks like them, talks like them, thinks like them, has had a shared experience, they're more likely to dive in and at least explore what it could be for them. So Isabel, we'll start with you. You created a podcast called Data Stories. I'd love to know, tell us and tell all the listeners why you created the podcast and what interests you about Data Stories.
Yeah, so I've kind of touched on it, but I created the podcast because I think data is kind of, to me, like the latest innovation in like storytelling, and it's got a really interesting capacity to influence change and influence outcomes. And I think, as I've said, that's really interesting in a business context, but it's really important in a political context as well, where or in just a civic context, where not just we're all, you know, citizens of a nation. We're not just consumers. And I think that there's a really powerful, like, kind of reserve of change that sits within data. And I think that's really important to talk about and educate people and kind of share that information. And so I created Data Stories with Isabel Becker because I want to share conversations, kind of bite-sized bits of information, stories, perspectives, you know, backgrounds about data, and just share that. And that's that. It's not any more fine-tuned than that, because I think the ultimate aim is just about spreading awareness of data and data culture and the data industry, the data economy, what data means, and not just a promotional interest in data, but also a critical one. So, you know, how is it shaping our society and us as as voters, and how, and kind of what's the significance of that, and how can we have a part in that. And I think it's called Data Stories because I think every conversation that I have about data is a data story. It's not just about data stories might typically at the moment be considered in the industry as people see data visualizations and see that as a kind of a data story, which it is, but I think that we can broaden out that term so much more, and data stories is just any conversation about data. And I think that the podcast form is so great for kind of sharing data stories because it's just so open and just really about sharing the data love, I guess.
No, honestly, I
love that.
I know you are really fantastic. I've listened, and it's I think when you've got a really real passion for something, it comes across, and I think that it's the real life connectivity sometimes that I think is missing within this industry, because it's not, there's sometimes, like you said, it's about being able to articulate things in a way that people can understand. And I think, like you said, through creating the podcast, your aim is to just share the stories. It's not a big overload of information that you have to listen to, and a textbook of all of these different key terms that people have got to get to know, otherwise they'll never get a chance in this industry. Just the real life application of it is what I think is great about it. So thank you, and I will be promoting this heavily.
Give it a listen.
Give it a listen, guys.
It's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
I love it. See, I'm all about promoting other people's work. So I'm going to have to do this in one breath, but I will do this. Caroline, you literally, first of all, let's start with the fact that you literally wrote the book on being a chief data officer. And I remember meeting you at Big Data London last week, and you having a stand, signing copies of your book. It was the closest I've ever felt to meeting a celebrity.
I thought you were going to say that.
No, genuinely. I was there, and there was a queue, and she had her books all lined up and was signing copies. I was just thinking, my God, I don't quite know how to approach. I was like, do I curtsy? What do I do here? But it was, it's an amazing achievement. You are so well respected in the industry. And I first wanted to start off by asking, what led you to put pen to paper?
First of all, thank you for a start point. And please, nobody curtsy, because I would die of motivation. It feels a little bit weird because earlier on, we were talking about imposter syndrome before we started talking.
Yeah.
So whenever anybody starts talking about me like that, I start looking over my shoulder to see who they're talking about, because it sounds so alien and so weird. But no, but thank you. So to talk about why I put the pen to paper in the first place. Basically because there wasn't anything to help us. I was one of the first chief data officers. Peter was one of the first chief data officers. We met at a conference, and if you can imagine the size of the scale of data conferences now, God, I think there may be 30, 40 of us, and that was pretty much all we had in the UK at the time of people who would consider themselves data leaders in this space.
Wow.
Because, and I'm still really good friends with a lot of them, because we literally had nobody but ourselves to help each other out at the time. Peter and I were both speaking, and we both liked what each other was speaking about. So that's how we came to know each other. And we both had this really stupid idea that, why don't we write a book? Because then we can share our knowledge.
Yeah. And I mean, stupid or absolutely the
Amazing.
Most brilliant decision anyone's ever done.
It depends on the cycle. If it's at the beginning, then it's brilliant.
Yeah.
If it's towards when I'm being on the third editing cycle, it's stupid.
Oh God, that's
different element.
Very tough.
We didn't think that we had all the answers. In fact, we knew we didn't have all the answers, which is why we named it a playbook and not a handbook. And the idea was that all we thought we were doing was walking out into the field, putting a stake in the ground, and then giving everybody something to argue about. Because without it being written down, we would constantly go around in circles about what it meant to be a chief data officer. So that was the whole idea behind the book. We put it down, we put it out there. We were totally blown away by the response to the book. I think somebody called it the de facto Bible, which was just ridiculous.
I mean, it's really like a guiding beacon for people. It's almost like I mean, it's very well respected. You're very well respected in the industry, but I think first mover advantage is really something, though. It really is. To someone who doesn't know what they're doing, to have any kind of guidance on anything is brilliant.
They can write better, but they can't write first.
They can't, exactly. No, that it's amazing. And please tell me, the listeners, a little bit about Carruthers and Jackson as well, and your own company. It's who you are. It's a part of what you've built. Your CEO. So do you want to sort of give us a run through of what you're excited about there?
Oh no, please don't make me tell about my babies.
I want you to talk all about your baby, so you've got the floor.
So we actually started from the book. So we wrote Chief Data Officer's playbook, and then we realised we'd missed a trick because that spoke to people who understand data. You know, we were talking about the language that people speak.
Yeah.
So we then created Data-Driven Business Transformation, which is the book for the non-data people among us. So that's the book that we kind of said, go give that to your CFO or your chief exec, and then they'll understand what they have to do. And that was our way of trying to cover the whole side of the C-suite to make sure we could bring everybody to this wonderful party. Mm-hmm. After that, actually, the business isn't what came next. What came next is the summer school.
Yes, of course.
So again, for many different reasons, mostly because I've actually given up on sleep because
sorry, do you sleep, do you eat, do you function in between your job as well and being a podcast host? It's quite it's a lot, it's intense. So well done.
I do manage to sleep. I have an 18-year-old and a husband and all those wonderful social niceties and a library at home, which is one of the best part about it.
Gosh, can we all come over for a library date?
Happily. Do you know what? I happily love that. You'd love the sofa. It's a big lion sofa as well.
Oh God, right. Why didn't we do this there? We've got it next time.
On-site visit.
On-site visit, exactly.
And we created the summer school as a way of kind of reaching out to more people than just the books could do alone. So the summer school's now in its 5th year. We've just finished the 5th year of it.
Amazing.
And it's basically a free course that we do to the community. It's our give back because we recognise that without people buying our books and without people coming along to hear us speak at events and things, then actually we wouldn't be able to do the things that we absolutely love doing.
Right.
So, and we also know that there aren't enough data leaders, chief data officers out there. So this isn't a case, I firmly believe, sorry, I know I'm jumping a little bit, I think it's important. I firmly believe that if you get anywhere in life, it's your obligation to send the elevator back down and make sure that more people come and join you.
Yeah.
So the Chief Data Officer's Summer School was a way of helping other people do follow the path that we followed and hopefully leapfrog us and do more and bigger and better things. And we created it to not only learn from the stuff that we learned from the books, but to help on some of the other things that we thought they needed it. So it covers things like you would expect, like how to do a maturity, how to write a data strategy, how to create a team, how to understand yourself and your pros, strengths, weaknesses, areas to work on.
Yeah.
But the summer school gave us the ability to tap into some of the other skills that are important in those type of roles, like resilience, like authentic leadership, like how to tell stories with data in the positive sense of the way, how to convey meaning. And it just means that we know that the next generation following us through and the generation after that, etc., have everything they need to set them up to succeed.
That's phenomenal.
So that's why we created the summer school. And then through the summer school and through the books, so many people asked us to help their organisations that there was no way to do that and still work in a full-time role. Yeah. The honest story is, and there is a video to prove what I say now, is that we named the company and we chose which of us would run it by flipping a coin.
You're joking.
Seriously.
Really?
So, and we have a video to prove this. So,
oh my gosh, we've got to get a link to that video. That's gold, really.
We really do. So
you must trust each other so implicitly.
Well, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't.
No.
I don't, I wouldn't want to work with somebody that I didn't trust.
Absolutely.
And anybody who's seen me and Peter work together on stage or work together in summer school, we have a very sibling rivalry type way of working. So when we're together, we do annoy the bejesus out of everybody. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I probably annoy him more than he annoys me.
Oh, I find that hard to believe.
Oh no, I can be incredibly annoying, and I work hard at it when it comes to Peter. However, I do trust him. He knows his stuff. He knows that I know his stuff. So that mutual trust and respect is there. Yeah. So all the banter and the Mickey taking that goes around that, hopefully that just makes us slightly more interesting to watch.
Yes, definitely, 100%. And I guess that's given such a good overview of who you two are as people. So I do want to continue on this trajectory. I first want to ask Isobel, I guess, any advice that you have for people you've got tons. You're so charismatic in the way that you put things across, but I think you've got a unique perspective on the fact that not only are you in an industry and working in it currently, and you're sort of still at the mid-range or start of your career, but any advice for people coming from a background similar to yours, or even not? What would you give them?
I think I would agree that working in data is about having curiosity. And so if that's a quality that you can identify with, I would say go for it. Apply for Kubrick. It's a good company to kind of propel you into a data role. It is a consultancy, so you will be handed a role that you'll have to adapt to, but it's actually just really good experience to kind of adapt to what you're given and kind of play it to your strengths. Other advice I'd say is connect with people on LinkedIn, go to events. We've got in-person events now, which are great. It does really help seeing other people in real life and kind of hearing their stories and their backgrounds, and it makes you think, maybe I could. Because I think for me, the greatest barrier is confidence, and not having the confidence to believe that I can do it or sell myself. I think getting into a company and getting into industry is a lot about selling yourself. And for some people, that's a really big stretch.
Yeah.
For some people, it's not. But for some people, it is really hard to do that. And so I think you will have to sell yourself in some way to get, work from somewhere. But I think kind of having the confidence to believe that you can do that, I think will kind of take you to that stage that you want to be in. And I think that connecting with people who you can find inspiring and relatable is a really good way to do that. So I'd say if you're curious, go for it, be open-minded and connect with people, because the things that you might see online might be, AI is, broken, or here's how to be a data engineer. And you're like, I'm not those things.
Yeah, it's intimidating.
But then you might speak to someone who's in data communications or something like that and find that relatable. So yeah,
that's brilliant. Thank you. That actually, I think even for me, it's that was a steep learning curve for me as well. So I think having someone telling me that actually that's a really great way of just getting your foot through the door and understanding, I think that's brilliant. And a lot of people are going to take that on, I'm hoping. I would like to ask you, Caroline, what advice would you give to the younger generation, having written the book on being a chief data officer, written the book on agile, basically written the book on everything, nervous about what a career in data looks like, nervous about taking that first step, or not knowing what it is? What would you give them?
I think the pieces of advice that I would give anybody starting out in a career or moving through their career is just to try. What's the worst that can happen? I mean, seriously, we build up in our heads so much, like, the sky's falling, Chicken Little is running around in the background, and the big doom clouds, all the rest of it. More often than not, if you try something and you ask for help, people will give you help.
Right.
And I think we build all these scenarios up to be so much more powerful and mean beasts than they actually should be. So if you're interested in any way, shape or form in data, just try, reach out, ask for help. This is the most fantastic community I think I've ever been part of. Yeah. I've never once, ever once asked for help in this community and not had somebody reach out and help me.
Yeah.
So, I would hope that other people feel the same about me, that if they were interested in knowing more about what we do, then reach out, ask. I'm more than happy to spend time encouraging people to come into this way of working. The one thing I would say, and something I'm incredibly passionate about, is, and it's slightly controversial, I guess, is I'm not actually worried if people want to work in data. I'm not worried if people want to work in tech. The only thing that I'm really, really passionate about is that people don't limit themselves based on other people's perceptions. So if they've got a passion, if they've got something they're interested in, they've got something that's even mildly like, curious about it, that's something that you should give yourself permission to expand, explore, experiment with.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that every single person on this planet has a talent, has something they're fantastic at. And I think it's criminal that most people live their lives so enclosed in their own comfort zones that they never find what it is.
Yeah, it's a scary thing to do. It doesn't come very intuitively to most people, especially in the younger generation. There's so much pressure now, so much competition. There's always been competition, but the way that things are, in terms of competition, I think that does put those barriers up to you wanting to explore, because the unknown is scary. But I think there's having had so much experience of life and richness of understanding different industries, I think for me that's very encouraging to hear that you're right. What's the worst that could happen? What else could happen?
I love the thought. Earlier on, you said something about somebody knowing what they want to do in their career. I'm turned 50 a few weeks ago and I still don't feel grown up.
Yeah.
So if somebody can tell me what I'm supposed to be doing when I grow up, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay, now I'm terrified again. If you don't know what you want to do, I'm terrified. No, I understand it completely.
I don't see why we have to lock ourselves in.
Yeah.
I look back at my parents' generation, the generation before, and they did careers for life. My dad was a miner. He went down the mine. That's what happened. He left school, walked into the mine, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
We aren't trapped in that kind of life. We can change industry, we can change lifestyles, we can go traveling, we can do all sorts of things.
Right.
There is a world of possibility and opportunity out there. Why would you not want to experiment and try all of them?
So true. So true. My God,
Agreed.
this is bloody inspiring.
Yeah.
Sorry for swearing. Sorry. Okay, so I think before I literally go down and ask for a free therapy session, that's what I feel like from both of you, I just got free therapy. But I'd love to know, what do you individually see for your future? I'll start with you again, Isabel. What do you see for your future?
I'm really interested to explore the data product space some more.
Nice.
It's a really interesting part of the data industry. It's all about kind of creating products to kind of serve users and engage them with data, and I think that's really interesting. But I also think that my own interest in data and that it's a tool for communication, and there's an interesting link between data and communication and narrative. I don't really know where that's going right now, but that is a passion, and that's what I want to pursue. And I think that the data industry is exploding in so many different directions,
Right.
that I think that's going to materialize into something. I just don't quite know what it is yet.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of following the interest, and maybe it's in a role or maybe it's in further study, or I don't know, but I think it's really interesting opportunity there, and I'm following it.
Amazing. Well, I am, for one, I'm probably going to follow you like a bit of a super fan now, having talked to you, but I think you've got really exciting times ahead. And I think
Thank you.
openness of mentality and being open to everything that comes to you is going to really stand you in good stead. So amazing. And to the person who obviously doesn't know what they want to do with their life and has no idea what anything looks like, despite having such an amazing legacy of work, what do you see for your future, can I ask?
I think expanding Carruthers and Jackson expanding Carruthers and Jackson Consulting is a big part of what we're focusing on at the moment. The consultancy just goes from strength to strength, and we are now helping organisations around the world with their data strategy, implementing the data strategy, and it's fascinating being able to work with public, private, third sector across different cultures,
different challenges.
It's amazing, and I love that side of it. So that's a big part of my focus at the moment. But because obviously I've given up on sleep and all the niceties that other people do, I'm also working on another book with Peter.
Oh, fantastic! This is very exciting. Any teasers or spoilers or title or?
Ooh, title would be Quantum Data.
Oh, Quantum Data.
That's as much as a spoiler as I can give you at the minute.
And guys, watch this space.
Yeah.
Coming soon, Quantum Data to an Amazon store near you. No, that's amazing as well. I think there's plenty to be keeping your hands full. Lots of exciting stuff for both of your futures. And before I sign off, because I have missed out quite a bit. This will get cut for the podcast, but I have missed out quite a few questions just because we could keep talking for the next 3 hours. But I would love to know, where can people connect with both of you? So for anyone who has really resonated with what you've both said, what's the best way to reach out?
Yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Isabel Becker. I'm sure we can link in the podcast, and follow my podcast on
Please.
Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's called Data Stories with Isabel Becker.
Amazing. Caroline, for yourself?
For myself, the easiest way is to either go through the Carruthers and Jackson website, so that if you're interested in the consultancy, if you're interested in the summer school that we talked about, both are accessible through the website. Funnily enough, it's carruthersandjackson.com. Shockingly, I know. And obviously by LinkedIn as well. So Caroline Carruthers, if you're interested in this space, I love talking about data. I could do it all day.
Which is why I'm going to have to, unfortunately, sign off this podcast, because we literally could talk about this all day. It's been an absolute pleasure having both of you on. It's been fun. It's been exciting. I feel like I've learned a lot. I feel like I may need to do another therapy session and book it in ASAP with the both of you. But it's been delightful to hear two people at two different stages, but with such an interesting and nuanced approach to dealing with the industry and also diversity. So thank you very much. Thanks to all our listeners, and we will see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.